Subcommittee. I am Councillor Scott Pater Harris, and I'm just going to introduce people to my left. So we're going to go to.
I'm Councillor Tom Coles. I represent Fratton Ward.
And I'm Councillor Madden, Nelton Ward.
Good afternoon. My name is Ben Attrell. I'm a solicitor employed by the council, and I'll be advising the subcommittee whilst they make their decision this afternoon. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Derek Stone. I'm the Principal Licensing Officer.
Good afternoon, I'm Lorraine Astle, Principal Regulatory Service Officer. I'll be giving evidence against the representations made for the 10.
Good afternoon, Steve Bell, Regulatory Services Team Leader.
I'm John Walsgrove, solicitor for the applicant.
Richard Vivian from Big Sky Acoustics. I'm a noise expert.
Just obviously, before we start, we've got Councillor George Madgwick who is observing. I just want to clarify, are you happy for Councillor Madgwick to observe today? We've got a nod from Mr Walsgrove, and obviously, are you happy as well?
Yep, I've got no objection. I've discussed it with yourself and Councillor Madgwick. I can't see there's any issue. I don't know whether Councillor Madgwick wishes to observe the deliberations. That's the only part that potentially might be contentious. But if it's training and he were to take no part whatsoever in the deliberations, then
I'm comfortable with that as long as Mr Walsgrove's comfortable with that. He's nodding, so he is. Okay, we're going to go for the appointment of chair. Ben, I'll hand over to you to do the appointment of chair.
Yes, do we have any nominations, members?
I believe that.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Pater Harris for chair.
Thank you. I'm just going to go and move a fan because it's interfering with the microphone.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Duly carried.
Thank you. Sorry, that was getting on my nerves and it was interfering with the microphone. I couldn't deal with it. Okay. So obviously now we have. Do we have any declarations of members' interests? Okay. I'm just going to make a small declaration in one of the packs that have been delivered today. There's a email that's come through from I'm assuming a T. Foster at 14 Solent Apartments. Up until May, I lived at 15 Solent Apartments, yet I did not know the person that lived at 14 in the time that I lived there, and I've never spoken to them. So I just wanted to put that on the record today for openness and transparency. Okay, we move on to item agenda 4, which is the Licensing Act 2003, a temporary event notice, consideration of objection notice, pier decking at Gaiety Bar, South Parade Pier, South Parade. So I'm going to hand over to the applicant to obviously introduce themselves, obviously to the no, I'm not. I'm going to hand over to the licensing officer. I've got that completely wrong. To outline the application. Sorry, I don't know. It's the heat getting to me, Derek, today.
Thank you, Chair. And you'll be pleased to know I'll be very brief. So we're here this afternoon to consider a notice of objection against the temporary event notice application for the pier decking at the Gaiety Bar, South Parade Pier. The objection notice has been submitted on behalf of the Head of Regulatory Services, and you'll hear from Lorraine Astle, Environmental Health, shortly as to why they have objected to the application. Members, your report was prepared by my licensing manager, Nikki Humphreys, who is unable to attend today, so I am presenting it on her behalf. The report in itself is quite self-explanatory, so I don't need to repeat what is set out before you. The 10 application is attached to Appendix A in your bundle. Only the police or environmental health officers can intervene to prevent a proposed 10 event from taking place on any of the 4 licensing objectives if within 3 working days of receiving the 10 they are satisfied that allowing the premises to be used in accordance with the notice it would undermine a licensing objective. Members, I don't think I need to say any more at this stage other than to say, once you've heard from Lorraine, the applicant, and Mr Walsgrove, then it will be a matter for you whether the 10 can be granted or give a counter notice to prevent the 10 from taking place if you consider it appropriate for the promotion of one or more of the licensing objectives. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's quite comprehensive and very quick. Do we have any questions, members?
Yes, I have a question. Sorry, Derek, but I'm not clear then of what you said. Well, is the regulatory service objecting to the 31st of July? I mean,
Yes, that is correct, yes.
So they're objecting?
It is, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no, it's just something from me to the licensing officer. I just want to check. Have you had communication with the applicant on previous TENs and had any issues been arisen from those discussions?
I have not personally, no.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to hand over to, obviously, the applicant would like to ask any questions of the licensing officer. Do you have any questions for? Oh no, sorry, the applicant. I'm completely.
None from me.
I'm completely out of it today, John. The applicant. Do you have any questions? No, and obviously responsible authority. No.
Beginning to consider my proposal, Chair.
Huh? I know. I'm having a mare. So obviously the applicant to present their case. Thank you. You usually sat there. That's what it is. You're usually sat that side. Completely throwing me.
Thank you, councillors. I will try and be brief, but it is important to go into this in a bit of detail. First of all, though, what I would like to do is offer an apology on behalf of my clients if any of the residents were unduly caused a nuisance on the 2nd of July when the officer has said she witnessed a statutory noise nuisance. Clearly, it wasn't the intention of the people operating that function on the day to cause any alarm or distress to any of the local residents, having put on what they considered to be a fun event at the end of the pier on a lovely summer's day, drawing people down to the area to enjoy the music and a day out and to effectively showcase the facilities at South Parade Pier. I mean, obviously you're very well aware of the history, I'm sure, of South Parade Pier and the fact that the Messrs Wares who are attending here and observing this hearing invested considerable amounts of money into the redevelopment of the pier, which at the time was effectively falling into the sea. And I'm sure you can appreciate that the costs of maintaining that pier to the incredibly high standard that it is does require them to look at commercial opportunities on the pier to assist in the ongoing maintenance costs that they've got to ensure that it maintains its iconic status. And so this event at the end of the pier was one of those commercial ventures to assist them in obtaining revenue to provide them with income for the maintenance costs. They had actually trialled this sort of event last year in September, I'll come on to that in due course, with a live music event at the end of the pier, which they got a temporary event notice for, and as far as they are aware, there weren't any concerns raised by any of the residents in relation to that event last year. And so this year they plan to have a similar event, this time not just on a one-off basis during the summer, but they've actually got a total of 4 weekends where they are hoping to do events, subject to your decision, of course. The first weekend was going to be on the Saturday and Sunday, 2nd and 3rd of July. Second event, 31st of July, which is what you're deliberating on today. And then they have 2 more planned, again, as I say, subject to your decision, one in August and one later in September. All of which are, we say, in perfectly, entirely reasonable hours. They're not late into the evening, principally during the daytime, and as I say, there to attract people to the pier, which I'm sure, as you'll know, is actually Portsmouth's biggest tourist attraction. The Wares tell me that there are over 1 million visitors to the pier every year, so it is driving people to this local area. It's providing employment to lots of people on the pier, but more importantly, bringing revenue into your city. Now, in my respectful submission, it's for the Environmental Health Officer. The burden of proof today rests on them to prove to you that it would have an adverse impact on the prevention of public nuisance if you allowed this temporary event notice to continue, and they have to prove that on the balance of probability. Is it more likely than not that a nuisance would reoccur if the event on the 31st of July takes place? You may have Googled yourself but the event on the 31st of July is live bands at an event called the Punk and Roll Summer Party. And that's the exact same event that was held back in September last year, which went ahead without any problems, and is part 2 of this summer's events. So on Sunday, the 3rd of July, that was the first part of the Punk and Roll Summer Party. We say you can have confidence in allowing this event to take place because obviously from what happened on the 2nd of July, lessons have been learned. The facts surrounding that particular day and what is asserted by environmental health is not entirely agreed, but I don't think it's for you to necessarily pick the bones out of who says what and who agrees what from that event. What you need to be assured about is if you allow the event to happen on the 31st of July, that sufficient measures are in place to ensure there's no public nuisance. So following the last event, my client has engaged the services of Richard Vivian, and you'll hear from him in due course. He's written a noise management plan, a copy of which was forwarded to you, and he'll take you through some of the steps he says that will be put in place, having discussed the issues both with the owners of the pier, Trevor Bratty, who's named on the temporary event notice, and also the sound engineer. Now, there's a complete change of personnel and equipment for the next event from the 2nd and 3rd of July. So for the next event, the primary point of contact effectively on the sound system will be a chap called, I think it's Andy Thomas. Now he's the organiser or assists to organise the music, live music at the bandstand in Southsea, so has worked with Portsmouth City Council over a number of years, I understand. I don't know the gentleman myself, but he's certainly got a working relationship with this local authority, and I understand could be trusted as an advisor to the pier operators on this event, and it's through his company that the sound system will be supplied, and you'll hear from Richard Vivian in due course that the type of sound system that is going to be used on Sunday the 31st of July is entirely appropriate for that sort of event and would not then lead to a nuisance, providing the correct monitoring is in place. And again, we say there's a change in the personnel and management around sound at this event from the last event, and you should be able to place confidence in that new management team. In addition to which, Mr. Tommy Ware has said himself that he will be at the event personally to make sure that things are put in place. Principally because you'll know that the environmental health team have issued noise abatement notices against both South Parade Pier Limited and also Mr. Bratty for that specific area on the pier, the lower deck, right at the end of the pier. Now I would say to you that should give this committee every confidence to allow the event to go ahead, because who wants to breach a noise abatement notice and face a prosecution against that notice is not the same situation as was on the 2nd and 3rd of July, where in terms of any nuisance witnessed, the next step would have been just to issue the notice. This time it would be to prosecute them and take them to the magistrates' court. So there is that significant, and it is a significant threat hanging over their head, that if they get anything wrong at the next event, the consequences are far more severe than they were at the previous event. So I ask you to attach weight to that. So just before we hear from Richard Vivian, because essentially I'm asking you to attach great weight to what he's about to say, I do just want to run through a few of the things around what's put in the Environmental Health Officer's objection around what happened on those particular evenings, just so you're clear on the facts. But as I say, what I want you to do is concentrate on the future and look at what might happen on the 31st of July as opposed to what did happen back on the weekend of the 2nd and the 3rd. So Lorraine Astle has said in the objection that she attended the pier following complaints and spoke to both Mr. Bratty and the sound engineer at the pier. what isn't said there is that following that conversation, whilst in her presence, the sound system, the music levels were turned down while she was there. She then left the pier and has recorded the fact that she's then witnessed a statutory noise nuisance, which, as I say, this isn't the place to dispute that that happened or not. But what we do want you to know is that the management team did respond to that conversation, because it appears in her representation they did absolutely nothing about it and just carried on in ignorance of her saying that the music was too loud. So it was turned down. It was turned down in her presence. The noise nuisance is then substantiated by the noise recording that was done in the person's flat at 7:25. What I would like to hear, and I'm sure we will in due course, is that event actually went on until 10 p.m. in the evening. So we say we turned it down. There was further monitoring done past 7 o'clock when the officer had visited, or around that time, and we say that the nuisance wasn't continuing. So we had responded in a positive way, even though, you know, at the time, clearly, the music, the bass, I think, in particular, was causing a problem for local residents. You'll note from the map that's been produced of where the complainants live, there are a number of complainants to the east of the pier, up by the Festing Grove area. Well, one of the members of staff who work for Trevor, they're not here today, but they have informed him on the day that the complaint was made that there was a private party in a garden in Festing Grove with a drum and bass dance music blaring out from a system in the garden. And we say it's highly likely that the majority of the complaints from that part of Southsea were caused not from the pier, but from that particular party, and the association was simply from social media, where people picked up on the fact that there was an event going on South Parade Pier. Because the only substantiated complaint you've got is obviously the one where Lorraine Astle visited the property and took noise measurements. On relation to the following day, the 3rd of July, where the officer comes down and says she hears loud music in her car once she stopped, but then within a couple of minutes of attempting to set up noise monitoring equipment, there was no more noise, and she says that's because she believes the event had finished at 7 o'clock. Well, it didn't in fact finish at 7 o'clock. It finished an hour or so later, at approximately 8 o'clock. So we say that clearly demonstrates that the event, which is the punk and roll live music on that Sunday, may, on occasion, have caused noise to be heard from residential properties, but it certainly, we would say, was not causing a nuisance and was being managed effectively. And as I say, the event on the 31st of July is the same live music for the punk and roll summer party. So it does seem a little odd that we can have a flash of a minute or so of hearing the amplified sound, and yet the event then goes on for another hour or more, and there's no, as far as we know, there are no further complaints about that level of noise. I'd also just want to draw this committee's attention, not necessarily to attach a great deal of weight to it, but it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention that the news reported a story on this application last week, saying that Environmental Health had objected to the temporary event notice and set out some of the details of the objection that's been made. And that particular story on Facebook attracted over 200 comments from local people, including local residents to South Parade Pier. None of them were complaining about the noise or nuisance from that weekend, and in fact every comment that was on there was a positive comment saying what a great asset South Parade Pier is to Portsmouth, that these events are of a temporary nature. It's not even once a week. It's, you know, this summer it's planned for 5 days over the entire summer, 3 days in July, 1 in August, 1 in September, and they say that it's not and shouldn't be considered to be a nuisance when it's not late at night, it draws people into the area. All the things that I've already mentioned to you were supported by that many people. What I have been able to do is obviously produce 4 written comments from local people who obviously, when they became aware of that story, have had discussions with Tommy Ware and taken to their computers or to their pen and paper, and again said similar things in those 4 representations, for want of a better word, to support the fact that a live event like this, on the odd occasion at the pier, should be welcomed and should not be challenged. We accept, however, that we've got to get that right. So we've got to put in the right processes to make sure that if we're putting on that event, that the local residents don't suffer a public nuisance. And at this point, obviously, I'm going to ask Richard Vivian to address you and go through his report, because it's his expert evidence on which I'm relying to give you the confidence to say, well, actually, whatever happened on that weekend, we can put that behind us, because we are now satisfied that the measures you've now put in place and will be operating on the 31st of July are sufficient to promote the licensing objective, and therefore this 10 can take place. So if I can just briefly introduce you to Richard, if you could just outline for the committee your experience, qualifications and expertise, please.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. So my name is Richard Vivian. I'm Director of Big Sky Acoustics Limited. Big Sky Acoustics is an acoustic consultancy that specifically works with the leisure and entertainment sector. I have over 30 years' experience in the assessment and control of noise, primarily from licensed premises. Degree in engineering. I'm a member of the Institute of Acoustics, the Institute of Engineering and Technology, and the Institute of Licensing. I've come to this matter and immediately seen that what we need to do is ensure that going forward there is best practice employed, and that's why I've prepared a draft noise management plan for the premises. That's for the site. That introduces best practice procedures that we think, to a certain extent, some of them have been carried out historically, but there's a few extra things in there, including a more detailed and rigorous monitoring process. We can ask ourselves what did happen. Maybe the sound system was too big, maybe there were some control issues, maybe something, and we can drill down into Mrs. Astill's data and stuff like that, but I don't think this is the right forum to do that, or to bore you with all that technical intricacies. I mean, clearly music was heard and was witnessed, but it could come from a multiple number of different sources. The question is, can they actually do what they're asking to do without impacting on the local community? I'm sure you're all familiar with the site. Effectively, the distance, the separation distance out to sea of this location, and also the fact that these sorts, music noise and things like that happen on the pier anyway, every single day. The fairground rides and whatever. There's music activity there. There's obviously activity within the Gaiety bar, but outside there's music continuously playing on the fairground rides. And from my experience and my discussion with my client, the complaint history from this site is minimal. It's minimal. As Mr. Walsgrove's already mentioned, the next event will be, the technical services will be provided by Andy Thomas. Andy Thomas, a PA system provider that's certainly known and works very closely with the council. A man, I'm sure, has got no interest in falling out with the council or in any of the officers there. He's given me the detailed specification of the equipment he will be using, and just to give you an idea of the sort of scale of sound system we're talking about, it's the sort of thing that we'd set up in a room like this if we were having a function in here. It's 2 loudspeakers on stands, 2 very small bass bins, a well-controlled system. This isn't some kind of warehouse rave sound system that's going on to the end of the pier. This is an appropriate sound system for few hundred people. And of course, it finishes relatively early. You know, this is an infrequent event, and I think the application time is finished at 8 p.m. So all in all, there's a whole load of measures. I mean, even potentially more measures than we would normally expect for an event like this. So, you know, I'm applying the same sort of approach that I would do for an urban music festival, the same sort of detail that I put into controlling multiple stages in, you know, any one of the number of festivals that I work with, and you know, I could sit here and reel them all off if you want, but you know, we're just employing best practice here to make sure that that Trevor and his team are managing the event, and you'll have seen quite an extensive dialogue between myself and Mrs. Astill. I don't think there's much between us going forward. The event needs to be run properly, and properly means that it doesn't impact on the local community in a negative way.
So having discussed with Andy Thomas and also Trevor and the Wares who own the pier, in your expert opinion, with the implementation of your noise management policy and the proper monitoring of that noise during the day, what do you say about the impact of that event on the licensing objective of prevention of public nuisance?
There is no reason to suspect that there is any risk to the prevention of public nuisance. There may be some very low-level music noise that's occasionally heard. There are obviously meteorological conditions that change the way that sound is propagated, but we've got in place a reactionary system here, so a proactive way of monitoring the sound and controlling it, and that's dealt with by real-time visits to particularly the complaint hotspots on South Parade, on St Helens Parade. These are areas that I've familiarised myself with. I've spent some time this morning walking around the area. I'm very happy with the recommendations that I've put in place. That's the way that I would manage an event like this normally. It's not an unusual thing to happen on the end of a pier at these kind of separation distances to residential properties.
And I think you've been engaged in numerous discussions with Mrs. Astill about that noise management plan, and there've been back and forth questions and answers.
Discussions. I mean, I really don't think there's anything between us going forward. I think we agree that there's a right way to manage this. And the question for you is you know, I guess how do we enforce those tools? But I mean, they're voluntary things that I realise you can't condition on a temporary event notice. But of course, we've put in front of you a noise management plan that we should jolly well stick to, because one day we might find ourselves in front of you again asking for another temporary event notice, and it would be foolish to have said we're going to employ this noise management plan and then not to do that.
And I think just to emphasise that point, councillors, with the noise abatement notice, so we're here before a licensing subcommittee saying this is a noise management plan we're putting in place. These are all the measures that we will be undertaking. So clearly, if there is a lack of implementation that leads to a noise nuisance, I have absolutely no doubt that in bringing any prosecution it will be raised, well, you said you were going to do that, you didn't do it. Bit of a home run there for environmental services on bringing home prosecution. So we say that should give you the confidence. Is there anything else you want to add to what you've said?
Only that if any of you have any technical questions for me, I'm very happy to answer them today, and obviously I would expect some sort of ongoing dialogue with Mrs. Astill and any of your other technical officers if they do want to talk to me. I'm happy to help in any way.
I'm grateful, thank you. So just in summary, to conclude... my apologies. Just in summary then, what I say in relation to this temporary event notice is there is a different approach to putting on this event by the organisers. There is a change in the management of that event and the personnel involved in the management of that event. There is a robust noise management plan in place, and there is the noise abatement notice overriding all of that to ensure, whilst you can't put conditions on the temporary event notice, that noise abatement notice, I say, has the same effect. And not only that, of course, they want to have future events at the pier. It's kind of like a test. I would hope you would feel confident to allow them to pass that test and then hold the next two events that they wish to do in August and September. Obviously, we can answer any questions that you have, either on a technical basis or in relation to the management. And I would ask you not to issue the counter notice in this case and allow the event to occur. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to members. Do we have any questions? I'll go Councillor Coles.
I just had a quick one. When setting up and sound checking, would you normally check the levels near any nearby residential areas as a matter of course?
That's a really interesting question, Councillor, because so we do quite a lot of large-scale festivals, and the whole idea of propagation tests, and you may well have heard those in terms of other events you have, sometimes are quite negative because they're producing noise before an event and often at the very loudest to see how the sound system works. So what we tend to do is work with the event organisers and say, actually, the very first thing that starts, the first event in the day, everybody should be, on alert for that. And these things never hit the ground with a bang. You never have your sort of, your finale number as the opening thing at midday, which is what's happening here. So effectively, just let the event run. And at that point, the first thing, let's see how things are going. Keep an eye on the sound system, the sound controls. Once everything's all in balance, and say it's not a very large sound system, first of all. There is a separation distance to the residents. So I think as long as those points are being regularly visited and checked, then as the day progresses and perhaps a more vibrant thing happens on the end of the pier, we already know where we are in terms of levels. So I accept propagation tests are widely deployed, but actually we've said the event starts at midday. It would be silly to just play some really loud music at 10 a.m. just to see if the sound system works. We know it works. We know the separation distances can work here. I mean, should you want to condition it? That's not an option here. This isn't a licence application. But should you feel you want propagation tests, they could be done, but I think they're not necessary.
Councillor Madden.
Thank you. I mean, I have to say I read all these papers several times and I'm now more confused than I was having read the papers. I think the problem I have is that there are different assertions being made by the two different sides, and I thought if this report is incorrect from the Environment Health officers, I think we should need to know that. If you just look at it, we have the environmental officer, a traffic warden, a community warden in Canoe Lake, you've got all that. Due to the high volume, this is the 2nd of July. Due to the high volume of music, the officer visited the pier to speak with the applicant. On walking onto the pier, vibrations from the bass could be felt underfoot. The officer spoke with Trevor Brady, I don't know how you pronounce that, and a sound engineer, and requested volume and the bass, whatever the hell, is reduced. Bass. Mr. Batty informed the officer the volume of music would decrease over the night as he had arranged the DJs so that they could play quieter music late in the evening. But he didn't turn down the music. He didn't do anything about it, according to this report.
According to that report, he didn't, but he did.
But yet the officer goes on, and an hour or so later, we're at St Helens Court at 7:20, and the music level indication was clearly audible. So, what I'm trying to get at, I think, is if we agree to the 31st of July, that it's going to be a better situation, and I'm not convinced of that yet. Okay, now all we have is the history of the 2nd and 3rd of July from the objectives viewpoint. That's all we've got, okay. And so we need to establish whether, in fact, you can do better. Can I just say from this, I believe in TENs. I have no problem with it. In fact, John will know that we sat together on the, when we did South Braid Pier, absolutely fantastic what was done down there. But that's not the issue at the minute, is it? The issue is there were serious complaints, some of which, then there was some noise going on near Canoe Lake, John. I don't know if it's relevant or not, I have to say. But there were serious complaints on both days. Now, what they were then told was, on the next one, you obviously discussed Sundays, that's the 3rd of July, live bands, rock and roll, and he said this would not be as basic event as it is live music. That doesn't say it won't be noisy. That didn't say it won't be loud. That didn't say it would be more decibels and whatever. So we have complaints then, again, on the 3rd of July. So on both events, the music was too loud. And clearly, what appears to me that when statements were made, or when the peer people were approached, they didn't do much about it. So the noise continued until the end of the event. I could say that, but I've lots of other things because I'm getting. But the other thing is, maybe we could all go home now, because if you actually agreed with environmental health a policy in relation, well, that's what I was getting from you, Richard. I have to say that you put these policies forward as to how to make this the 31st July a better setup, right? And if that's happened, and environmental health are agreeing to it, well, we could all move on, couldn't we? But I don't know. I'll have to look to you, Ben, because I'm totally confused.
Can I just respond to some of the comments? So, I know they're not questions, but...
there were questions in the fact that there didn't appear to be a proper response from those responsible for these two events.
Yeah. Okay, well, let me deal with that specifically. As I said, they did turn the music down, and in looking at the objection that's been made, the complaint which has been substantiated is the one where the officer sets up the recording equipment and monitors that noise itself at 7:25, I think, off the top of my head, from memory. But that's 7:20, okay, I stand corrected. The event went on until 10 p.m. So what we're saying is the music was turned down when the officer attended at the pier. It was turned down while she was there, in her presence, so we can't understand why she hasn't put that in the report, and we'll hear from her in a moment as to why that was. And we say thereafter we were monitoring the noise. What we're not saying is that we did everything perfectly and you should ignore the objection that's been raised. What we're saying is, yes, clearly there were some issues on that day with the equipment being used and the people that were running the sound system, which we've now corrected with the instruction of Richard Vivian and using Andy Thomas to supply the equipment and do the monitoring. So we're saying, yes, there were probably failings on that day. I don't think we need to go into the ins and outs of what happened then, because we're accepting we probably didn't get it right. Let's not go into that. Let's make sure we've got it right for next time. The issue with the discussion with Richard and Lorraine is not about whether that noise management plan is sufficient, because I would hope Mrs. Astle would say, well, it is a good noise management plan and that would be sufficient. I think they have a lack of confidence in whether that's going to be executed, which is why they've maintained their objection and allow you to make the decision whether you have the confidence that what we've told you about who's dealing with that event and how they're going to deal with it will prevent any noise nuisance. So there is, I think there is an agreement over the plan. It's just whether there's a confidence in the execution of that plan. And rightly, I think Environmental Health say, well, that shouldn't be their decision as to whether the event should go ahead and they should have confidence. It should be yours, which is why we're here. I hope that's covered everything that you asked.
Go ahead, Leo.
Sorry, John, I'm still confused about it, because you mentioned that there was an event last year of a similar type, okay, with a TEN, I think it must have been last year, and there were no problems. Okay, we don't have this in the report, and that's fair enough, right? But nevertheless, following on from the event last year, which went well, and no complaints, or if there are, I don't know, but it doesn't. In that way, it doesn't matter. You then have an event this year where there are several complaints, lots of complaints from people in the area, right? You've then given us this document, which is fine, but Richard, to me, it's words. Okay. We will endeavour to ensure that noise emanating from South Parade Pier will not cause a nuisance. Well, you know, I mean, you're a lawyer, you know that wouldn't stand up anywhere. We positioned the performance area on the pier decking at the end of the pier with loudspeaker directed away from South Parade. Are you saying that that is not what happened on the 2nd and 3rd of July? That in fact the speakers will be heading in a different direction? That's one. Let me just finish these little bits here, okay. Sound levels will be checked in agreed maximum So an agreed maximum level may not be exceeded. And that's where the environmental health people come in anyway. We will not carry out sound checks or test checks before the event. Well, that's fair enough, okay? I'm not doing all of them. We carry out hourly checks during any performance on the decking and will record observations and actions to our noise logging sheets. I'd just like a bit more flesh on that, i.e. if you find it is too loud or getting too loud or whatever. I'm not an expert on noise, right? I don't think anybody's are, and decibels and all the rest of it. But what you would do about it, right? And we will regularly review the noise management policy and respond quickly to the needs of our neighbours, blah, blah, blah. So those are the sort of things. These are completely different from what happened on the 2nd and 3rd of July. Is that correct? Or the proposals are?
Yes. I mean, I think that's the short answer. I didn't feel that the forum today was to, I think, Mr. Walsgrove's comments, to pick over the bones of what
No,
may
I
or may
accept
not
that.
have
I
gone
accept
wrong.
that, because I wouldn't have understood 6 decibels.
Just to accept that it should have been better. It should have been like the 2021 event. I mean, all the questions actually that you asked, Councillor, all very good questions, all already been asked of me by your technical officer. So we've talked about speaker directionality, we've talked about how the noise logging process works, we've talked about how reactive it is, if there is a problem, what happens. We've been through all that. There's been quite an extensive email exchange. It's all fully documented. So, yeah, they're all very good questions, but there's a lot more substance that sits behind that noise management policy. The reason the noise management policy is written in its form, in simple bullet points, is that it's a policy that we want everybody on the ground to adhere to. And I'm sure you as a licensing committee will be more than aware that if you grant a premises licence with maybe 150 conditions on it, unfortunately not everybody will read all those conditions. If you grant something with some key bullet points that are very easy to understand, then all members of staff find that an accessible document and go, oh, we should be doing that, we should be noise monitoring, we should be doing that. And it's a very easy to understand functioning document that sits operationally in the premises. But behind it, all those technical questions are answered and dealt with. So there's for example, the noise logging. There is a noise logging sheet. There's an example of how to fill it in. All these things already exist. They're already out there. They're already with my client's team, and they know what to do and how to respond to react to any noise complaints.
Just simply put, in response to your comment, it is being managed differently from last time by different people with different equipment.
But, sorry, Richard, you said that you've already supplied the City Council Environmental Health with putting flesh on these proposals, i.e. the number of decibels and all that sort of thing, and what would happen if... That's already been supplied.
Extensive dialogue. I believe that some of the email threads probably copied in your bundle, but these questions have been asked by your technical officer. He's more than capable of understanding my documents.
Okay, thank you.
Happy with that, Leo?
Well, I don't know, can we call environmental health in at this stage?
They get theirs next, so we'll finish with the applicant and then we'll move on. I just have a couple of questions. And, Leo, you mentioned about decibels. I think it's important to understand, because obviously we've got some readings in our report, and I mean, I was always under the impression that about 50 decibels was about a quiet refrigerator. Is that about right? Can you clarify?
Right. Okay. This is where I try not to turn this into an open university lecture. There were some measurements that were taken in the field, and I haven't bothered to question them, to analyse them, to do with that. I've accepted Mrs. Astor's measurements, and we're moving on to the next event. The sort of thing that we want to achieve is the prevention of public nuisance. So we want to make sure that whatever we do doesn't materially affect the residents in their properties, and that's key. That's fundamental. And the Licensing Act doesn't give us any threshold levels. It leaves it down to the prevention of public nuisance. So we want to. If you open your window in the balcony and you listen, and maybe there's some propagation effects due to wind and to temperature inversion or something, could you hear music? Yes, you could. so on occasions, under those conditions. Is that a public nuisance? No, it's not. And there would be nothing between myself and your technical officers in that respect. If that noise is so great that you can't sleep at night or you'll have to turn your television up, then we're starting to talk about material interference. So I think in terms of setting threshold levels, well, we can either go to Portsmouth City Council's own guidance on event noise management, but that's a document that's written for larger scale events. That's written for sort of 5,000 people plus. And then if we looked at that, that references the Noise Council's Code of Practice on Environmental Noise Control from Concerts, and that would talk about 65 decibels at a residential boundary. Now that's in your own documents, and that's fine, but I'm saying we're far, far lower than that. This is a much smaller scale event. You know, we're not, we don't propose anything like those sort of boundary noise levels. And yet this is an infrequent event. I mean, the code of practice for environmental noise control at concerts is designed for up to 12 event days per annum, and it suggests a noise level that is, you know, pretty intrusive. I mean, it's pretty loud. We're saying that this is far, far lower than that, and therefore we haven't bothered applying those criteria. We're saying we want to be more stringent than that, more rigorously controlled than that.
Yeah, that is quite reassuring, considering that 78 decibels was the height that was measured on some of the readings.
And
obviously 65 is what you've just quoted. So obviously we're talking about 13 more than what we probably should have at the previous event.
I haven't drilled down into the technical reasons why that was done. I didn't feel that this isn't an appeal of a refusal. This isn't an appeal in the magistrate's court.
No, I'm just clarifying obviously you're the sound expert that's been brought in, so I'm asking you the question about decibels.
Yes.
As you'd probably suspect that somebody would today. So obviously, I mean, we've had an admission that things did go wrong already from Mr. Walsgrove, and I accept that is the case. So if you're moving forward, what is the acceptable level that you would be looking for the event?
Not to cause a material interference in any residential property.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions?
Sorry. Could I just say yes?
Absolutely.
The information was sitting here on the desk, but just I hadn't read it in advance. I've just read it, sorry, when you were speaking there. So it started on the 12th of July, and the last thing you've done is write to the council on the 19th of July. That seems to be the last bit of correspondence. Yeah. So then we'll wait. We'll have to wait and see whether environmental health are happy with your proposals. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more for you, Councillor Coles? No, thank you. I'm going to pass over to responsible authorities. Do you have any questions? Do you have any questions, Derek, at all? No? I'll hand over to yourself. Lorraine, do you have any questions?
I mean, obviously I've got questions, and I have been working closely.
Just first, before we go anything, can you just do one thing? Because Mr. Walsgrove asked a question of something that was omitted from the report. Can you just address that first?
Yeah.
Is that all right? Thank you.
Yeah, that's all right. Obviously, it is in my report to committee that I did speak with Mr. Bratty, and who I believe to be his technician at the time, because he had a tablet in his hand. He did go and speak to the DJ and ask for the noise to be reduced. It says in my report that the reason that I visited the complainant is because I didn't feel that the levels were reduced significantly enough not to cause a statutory public noise nuisance. So I did make comment as to the reasons why. Has that answered the question, or I'm correct? Okay, so I've just got a couple of questions. So in relation to Andy Thomas, reference has been made to Andy Thomas and him being known to the council. I've made inquiries and I confirm that is true. He does help with the setup with the bandstand and...
Fine. Do you have any questions for Mr.
Yeah, so I'm getting to that point.
Okay.
So Andy, you've made reference with regards to Andy Thomas being appointed by the Wares to help out, but you said that's subject to Mr. Thomas's availability. So obviously that raises concerns for me for the next event.
Yeah, so
He's definitely there. Sorry, yes. He's definitely there for the event on the 31st of July, which is all you're determining now. I have said there are 2 more events proposed, obviously subject to whatever happens today. His company will certainly be engaged for those 2 events, but as yet we don't know whether he will specifically be at those 2 events. So all we can say is we're dealing with the 31st of July. He's definitely going to be there. It's his equipment that's being used. That's the contractual position, that if it's granted, we have that event and it's a success and we don't get complaints, we will then submit the second temporary event notice for the August event, and then we can let you know whether he's actually going to be there. If it's not him, one of his colleagues, so that you specifically know the name of the person at the event who you would need to go and speak to about the sound system, as opposed to perhaps what happened at the last event, where I think there was more than one person that seemed to have a say over what levels of music was played. So there'd be a much more direct line of responsibility, and we'd let you know who that was. We hope it will be Andy on each occasion.
Thank you. I think that's it, apart from, obviously. The only other thing is you made reference to the news article, which we were fully aware of. How many of those people actually live locally in the area surrounding the pier?
Yeah, so first of all, I did say I was just going to mention it, and I don't expect you to attach a huge amount of weight to a Facebook article, but it was just interesting that over 200 people. I think only one person actually disclosed where they lived, and that was in Savoy House, I think it is, the McCarthy and Stone building at the end of the pier. I can't remember the lady's surname, so she'll have to forgive me. Her first name is Marilyn, and she actually put in quite a few quotes saying, I've lived here for 21 years. She met her husband on the pier in, I think it was about 1970. They absolutely love it there. They had their windows open so they could listen to the music. That's the only one who mentioned their address, but certainly other people did say, I live locally, and it didn't cause me a problem, but I couldn't say the addresses.
Okay. Whether this is relevant or not, you make reference to noise complaints being minimal for the pier. Is this a general comment for the whole of the pier, or just the decking platform?
Yeah. So we're dealing today with a temporary event notice for the lower deck, and so the only reference point I've got is the event that was on the 21st of September when they had the Punk and Roll event last year. And as far as we're aware, there weren't complaints. But, I mean, you could tell me otherwise if you had complaints, but nothing was drawn to the attention of the organiser then. And I'm sure had you had complaints, you would have objected to the last temporary event notice, because I understand that's your policy. You won't object to a 10 if there haven't been complaints, but as soon as there are complaints, you will object, hence the objection this time. So I'm just basing it on that one. No general comments about the pier. Because I know there's ongoing discussions with the Gaiety Bar about music there, but that's not relevant for today.
Okay, thank you.
Joe, anything else you want to add?
No, that's it, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything for yourself, Ben? No? Okay. I'm going to hand it over to yourself, Lorraine and Steve, to present your case to us today.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, the case we're making representations is for the 31st of July is mainly backed on the events that took place on the 2nd and 3rd of July and the lack of control by the management staff. As you know, I was the visiting officer on the evening, and I was the person that actually visited the complainant at the time. The reason that we didn't get more complaints or investigated the complaints on the evening is because they didn't have our contact number. All the other complaints came in, came in afterwards, after the event took place, and they were still filtering through last week. From the the information that you've been provided, you can see that we had 22 complaints on the Saturday and 8 complaints on the Sunday. I know Mr Walsgrove has been making reference to the similarity to the event that's going to take place on the 31st is similar to the event that took place on the Sunday. The reason behind not getting any information or evidence about the noise that took place on the Sunday is because we was misinformed of the time that it was going to finish. I myself went down there several times to try and witness the noise. First of all at 6:20 on the Sunday, and the noise had stopped by the time I'd set up the noise monitoring. And I went down again around 8 o'clock to listen to the noise then, but by the time I got down to the pier, it had stopped. So there was complaints on there. Reference has also been made to the noise abatement notice and them not wanting to breach that with the 10s, should it be granted on the 31st. The noise abatement notice is still under the timescale within a right of appeal. So they have 21 days in which to appeal in the Magistrates' Court. So therefore, if the 10s goes ahead, they can still obviously appeal this in court. With regards to the reference made to the noise from Festing Grove with the party, we didn't receive any complaints in relation to noise coming from a domestic property. The only noise that I witnessed was to be coming from the pier on the 2nd. Mr Vivian has made reference to his noise management policy. I believe that there's still work that needs to be done on the noise management policy for it to be in place. Preferably training on the staff on how to deal with the issues and any complaints received. There's been no mention of temporary threshold shift, which is where if there is a person doing the monitoring has been in the noise, they don't get the full aspect of it when they go out of the site because they've still got their ears ringing from the noise in the area where they've been. The also thing that's not been mentioned, Richard did touch on it, Mr Vivian did touch on it, is the propagation and the weather conditions. Obviously the sea acts as a reflective surface and takes the noise further on still conditions. That is another concern of mine with having the temporary event notice where it is on the decking. Reference has also been made to the speakers and it being directional. This is mainly for the impact of and the benefit of the crowd or the customers that are actually enjoying their event. I believe that there is further work, like I say, on the noise management policy side of things and further training needed before any events can take place and to satisfy us that they are going to actually carry out what they intend. It's already been brought to your attention that we can't apply conditions to a temporary event notice, so it's all done on a voluntary agreement that this will take place. I have, like I say, got concerns because I was assured that this would happen at the last event on the 2nd and 3rd of July when I raised my concerns then, that monitoring would be carried out. I believe it was, but only at the end of the pier. It wasn't, they didn't go any further than that. So like I say, a lot of issues need to be addressed. I think that is pretty much it. So I don't know if you've got any other questions that you want to ask me. Like I say, I've included a lot of the information of where the complaints were received from in your pack from the 2nd and 3rd of July.
I'm going to go first actually this time. So it says in this pack that we have here that on the Saturday that there was, it actually says 15, but I've just counted the numbers, it was 14, but you said 22.
We actually, after the event, we had 2 complaints on the evening purely because the complainants had our contact details from previous issues. Hence the reason I visited both of those complainants. The other 20 complaints came in after the event via the web complaint form online. So these do not get picked up by the duty officer. These get picked up by the City Help Desk and filter through during the week. So it could be up to 5 days after the event that we get this information, if not longer. Like I say, we were still receiving complaints last week.
Right, okay. I mean, I'd have had these papers were served on me probably on the 14th of July, so that doesn't correspond with what you've just said.
Yeah, so that would have been possibly the last day that the complaints was received was the 14th.
But my report effectively is incorrect now, because I've got it, you've told me 22, and this report says 14.
Which report was that? Was that on the...
Yeah, it is under... It's page 10 and 5 on the objection notice.
So the level of impact, so after that date we did receive lots of other complaints come through. I've got a detail of all the reference numbers if you want that.
No, I mean, I no point me having the reference numbers now because we've started the session, so effectively I would be remiss to take them, and I think that would be the legal advice I'd be getting.
Yeah, there's been a flurry of an exchange of information between the parties leading up to the hearing. And I believe, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, that the updated figure has been part of that exchange of information. So I can't see any issue with you taking into account the 22 figure
it's just not very helpful, Ben, that we're halfway through and we get that thrown at us, but I'm happy to move on. I'm just going to say, on the Sunday, there were no measurements made for the event, but it was clearly witnessed. I mean, why was no measurements made?
Because by the time I'd set up the noise monitoring equipment, the music had stopped. And because of the email that I'd received from Mr. Walsgrove, I was under the impression that the event was finishing at 7 p.m. So therefore, I assumed, wrongly on my part, that it had already finished earlier at 6:30.
Okay.
I do just need to pick up on that because I did take exception.
John, can we just wait till you get your chance in a minute? It's all right. You can have your chance in a minute.
It's not a question. It's just that.
Yeah, you can clarify it in a second. Honestly,
She said I misled you.
Let the members speak, and we'll do it in a minute. Honestly, you know, I'd always give you a fair crack.
No, but
anyone else questions?
The moment goes, doesn't it? When something crops up on the spot, you want to deal with it there.
I understand.
I understand.
I understand, but you've done this before. You'll be fine. Councillor Coles, any questions?
So there's 22 complaints, 8 on a Sunday, and I've got 11 dots on my map. So how many of these complaints come from which dots?
Did you receive, there was another attachment, I don't know if you received it, with the number of complaints in each location? If not, I've got a copy of one here if you would like it. I've got a copy, do you want this breakdown?
Chair, I've just checked with the licensing officer and it has been served on the other party.
No, Ben, I'm sorry, but we have not been given this. This is the first time I've seen this document.
So this is a table. John, have you seen this? Yeah.
I have. I think Mr. Stone forwarded that along with the other documents. So you must
have it. Honestly, I'm looking through my packs. It's not here.
I think it's probably worth just taking a moment to make sure that members have got all the papers, the relevant papers, in front of them.
Just 5 seconds, just to have a look. Because,
for fairness for both parties, because there have been several documents.
No, that's
Going backwards and
the first
forward.
time I've ever seen it, and it's not in our document. Yeah, we've got this table, but it's not that table.
No, it was that one. I did forward it to the licensing officer and Mr Walsgrove yesterday.
I mean, if you've got it and you're happy, I'm just saying that we haven't had it. So can we just have 2 minutes just to read through it? Is that all right? Do you have any questions? Do you want to carry? We're just going to go back in now. We have a question from Councillor Madden.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm still confused, I have to say, in some of the issues, but I want to go back to the fact
Chair,
that there's-
sorry, may I interrupt one moment, please? Sorry, would you mind turning off your microphone, please? I'm just concerned about the sound of the camera.
Yeah, sorry, you need to sit on top of these, Brittany, don't you? Anyway, the bit that I hadn't read earlier on is now the most fascinating bit that I hadn't, and thank you for giving it to me, but I had no warning I was going to get it. But let's talk, we are 10 days away for something which we have to give agreement to, and how it's going to be formed. So that's the 31st of July, it's my wedding anniversary. And yet, on the 12th of July, to be fair, I have to say, Richard Vivian sent an email, right? The last email that we have here is the 19th of July, where he has given some information as to the type, meaningless to me, I have to say, but the type of PS system that will be used. That will mean things to yourselves, but it will mean nothing to me, right? But you said, so let me tell you here, work needs to be done. I'm not sure what that means. Okay, if this is to be granted, and I think we need a bit more information on that, because if it's going to take 2 months to do that or 2 weeks to do it, well, that puts us in a bit of a quandary if we want to go one way or the other. You also mentioned about weather conditions, and I think that's a fair point. But I don't know that you can take in. Can you adjust? Can things? Sorry, I got to ask here. Can noise levels be adjusted, so if the wind's coming in from the sea or whatever and pushing everything towards the South Parade Pier, South Parade, can this PA system, can that be corrected in order to make sure that there's not undue noise coming in to residents?
It would be just a matter of them monitoring it and reducing the volume.
I think you're saying yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Could you tell us what sort of other work needs to be done to satisfy your good selves that the event could take place and it be properly managed?
Okay, so obviously we would like to see that there's evidence of the training on staff, because I've been informed that there won't be a noise consultant on board. It will be just Mr. Andy Thomas, and he's more of a sound engineer, setting up the equipment, I believe. I don't know if Mr. Vivian wants to, or John wants to correct me there. There is also, in the noise report, it needs to specify whether they are going to make contact with the residents. It just says they may do. It's always good practice to notify. There was misinformation on the web page, I believe, for the last two events, where the event on the 2nd of July wasn't advertised. and the event on the 3rd of July was advertised, but it finished at a different time to what it was advertised. Complaints are always more likely to occur and cause an issue when people are misinformed. So I believe there's still areas that needs to be addressed for the noise management policy. And also reference has been made to a public noise nuisance can't happen before 2000 hours. Well, it's been shown that it can.
I am confused, sir. Shall I come back tomorrow? I haven't read all the documentation. In fact, I hope we have all the documentation.
I think we
there's
did.
not all the bits of paper going to be produced.
I hope not.
You said evidence of training of staff, the person, and you mentioned a name, which I won't mention because we don't tend to do that. You're suggesting that that person, who has some evidence of noise levels, is not a suitable person. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not aware of Andy Thomas's qualifications, but I believe that he sets up the events equipment.
So if you were satisfied that he had the qualifications, that would be one step further.
Yeah.
Okay, that'll do me for the minute.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask a question about the table that you've handed out to us. So we've got, I'm going to look at, I've just put some stars next to Spencer Road on Saturday and Spencer Road on Sunday, and it's one complainant. Is it the same person?
Yes, it's the same person.
Okay, and would I be saying...
So, sorry to interrupt, but most of those where the person has complained on a Sunday, it's the same person that's complained on the Saturday and the Sunday.
Okay, yeah, I just want to clarify
It's just that I was asked for a breakdown of the noise complaints on a Saturday and the Sunday.
Just, I'm interested because the map obviously shows a bit of disparity about one end. On the actual map for the complainants, you've got obviously one at the Festing Grove end, and then you go down towards South Parade. Would you believe that the wind direction would have had any influence in that?
Yes, and the stillness of the water as well. So obviously, when it's still weather conditions, the sea will reflect the noise further. When you're actually on the pier, the noise levels don't seem as loud because you're on top of it. When you're further away, it will seem louder.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Tom? No. We'll move on. Mr. Walsgrove.
Just a couple of questions. Just picking up on that last point about those objections further away. You didn't make any observation yourself of any nuisance at that location. You were at the St Helens Court location only, weren't you?
Yes.
Yeah. And obviously we've given an explanation as to why we think people at the east end of Southsea were objecting because there was a private party. Were those people who objected on Sunday from that area, or were they from the more directly in front of the pier?
I believe there is more directly around the pier.
Yeah. Which kind of corroborates the point I made that was a private party on the Saturday that was causing the nuisance in that location. Would you agree with that?
I would say that the noise still travelled on the Sunday.
But you don't know that because you didn't witness it.
I didn't witness it. I heard it over a personal telephone conversation, but I didn't witness it.
You can't. Surely you're not putting that forward as evidence.
No,
as an environmental health officer, you can't be.
The reason I did not witness it is because I believe the noise to be finishing at 7 o'clock, as informed.
Yeah, which nicely brings me on to the point where you said I had provided misleading information. So in your email to my colleague, who unfortunately was off sick when you emailed, and then the bank holiday of Easter weekend came along when you wanted details about this event, and I responded at the first opportunity on my colleague's return from work, and I said to you that the event was intending to finish at 7 o'clock, although the temporary event notice had been applied for later, at 9 o'clock in fact, because there may be some overrun, because at these events it's always really hard, and I dare say everyone remembers the Paul McCartney case in London where they couldn't get him off the stage at the time the licence was granted and he actually ended up breaching that licence. Same thing here, Mr Bratty took a sensible approach of applying for a slightly later temporary event notice just in case things overran. So it wasn't misleading, was it, to say, well, it's intended to finish at 7 but it could overrun. That's not misleading.
I disagree.
Okay.
Can you please use your microphone?
Sorry, I disagree.
That's fine. That's your prerogative to disagree. The committee can make their own mind up on that. Just in relation to the training of staff and the need to see Andy Thomas's qualifications, has he not disclosed those in conjunction with the events he's running with his city council to show that he's suitably qualified and is a responsible person to run your events on the bandstand?
I'm unaware. I had to make inquiries with our events team whether he's known to them or not.
And their response was that he was known to them, and surely they would have raised concern with you at that stage if they thought he wasn't appropriate to manage an event like this.
I don't know what they... Obviously, and my manager deals with the events team normally, so I can't really comment on that.
But you're effectively saying to this committee you can't be certain that he's got appropriate qualifications. You could have found that out easily, couldn't you? You could have asked us, in fact, before today. If that was a principal concern, and it seems to me that's the only concern you've got left. Is he qualified and are the staff going to be trained? We could have answered that. We're now going to have to answer it. I'm going to ask Richard Vivian to talk about that now, but I'd like your response. Why didn't you just ask us?
Yeah, because I believe it is the applicant's responsibility to provide the information and demonstrate that they can operate the event without causing a public nuisance.
We didn't know you were going to take issue with Andy Thomas, because when Richard Vivian emailed you and said, oh, Andy Thomas is running the event and he's well known to Portsmouth City Council, if you'd had any concern, we would have expected the response back to say, oh, well, I don't know what his qualifications are, can you let me know? We couldn't have been more open about what we were doing.
No, sorry, you've only just confirmed that Andy Thomas, because it was down to his availability, you have only just confirmed today that he will actually be available on the 31st to run the event.
That's not right either. So that was confirmed to you previously, both by myself in email and by Richard Vivian before today. So twice you've been told that in an email by two different people, and neither of which got a reply to say, well, we don't know who he is, can you give us some more information, which we could have easily done. And I will ask Richard just to address the committee, and because he's obviously spoken to Andy and can give them the reassurance that they're looking for.
Obviously, I can only go back to the email from Richard Vivian on the 20th of July, where he says, my client is to use Mr Thomas to provide technical services for the proposed event on the 31st of July. Obviously, that commitment going forward is subject to their contractual agreements and Mr Thomas's availability.
That didn't mean the commitment on the 31st of July. That meant the ongoing commitment for the next two events. So I appreciate you may have misread that. But perhaps, sir, could you just hear from Richard Vivian about Andy Thomas and whether he's capable?
Yeah, I think it's a material on a third point. Please, go ahead.
Councillor, can I just say I'm a bit disappointed? I did come here with a sort of conciliatory approach. I was trying to find a way forward here. And as you've rightly pointed out, these email threads go back to the 12th of July. You can see it all. It's all laid out in front of you. It's at the 12th of July that I opened my email that I can't get hold of Mrs. Astill by telephone. Her phone always goes to voicemail. Here's the noise management plan. Please let me have any of your input. And we're trying to work here to find a solution, I say, not to pick over the bones of what's gone forward. Mr Thomas is a known supplier to the council. I've spoken to him at some length over this event. He does your bandstand events. He's he's an authorised supplier to you of technical services. If Mrs. Astill doesn't know him personally, then that's perfectly understandable. It's a large organisation, but people involved in event production at the City Council know of him and regularly use him and have done for a long time. He's very competent. I've spoken to him at some length on the telephone.
So I think that deals with that point. And then I've just got one last question.
Go ahead.
Which is not about this event, actually. It's about the other major outdoor event down in Southsea, which is Victorious. Have you ever attended that event?
This committee is not about Victorious, this is about the South Parade
Yeah,
decking.
I don't see the relevance, Mr. Walsgrove.
It bears relevance, sir, because the point I made in my submission about these events being on a temporary basis and effectively 5 days over 4 periods of weekend, it is an assessment about what is likely to impact adversely on the local community. And for them to have issued a noise abatement notice and to object to a temporary event notice where Victorious itself is significantly more damaging to the prevention of public nuisance and is significantly louder than South Parade Pier's music. For example, I live in Gosport. I can hear Victorious in my house, and that's miles away. So the residents in Southsea who are at Victorious, and that's a 3-day event, much later in the evening, it's granted every year without any problems. I just want to understand, as do many of the people who wrote into the news on that Facebook item to say, well, how come Victorious is allowed to happen when it's way louder, causes way more nuisance than the odd event on South Parade Pier? I'd like to hear the Environmental Health Officer's view. Obviously, she can only give that if she's been to Victorious and knows how loud the music is. If she lives anywhere in Portsmouth, she'd be able to hear it, I suspect. Because it's important when you come to make a decision that if you issue a counter notice, the people of Portsmouth, certainly the 200 odd that wrote into the news on their Facebook page, would like to understand why you would grant them a licence to create nuisance 3 days a year, and why South Parade Pier can't have, for a much, much smaller event with much quieter music, the opportunity of 4 to 5 days a year.
I'm not going to allow it to be answered because I don't feel it's relevant to the application we're talking about today, purely because we're talking about 2 different events. I mean, we're talking about an event that has 70,000 people at one day and an event on the pier. I don't see the material. I don't see where they're relevant to each other. So I'm going to ask Ms. Astill not to answer that.
The relevance of the point is the impact of noise nuisance on local residents.
But I think we can agree to disagree that they are fundamentally different, and therefore they're going to have no relevance on the bearing of the decision we make today, and we'll leave it at that.
I'll leave it there, but I don't see how loud music affecting a local resident is fundamentally different. It's exactly the same.
It's a fundamentally different event, John. It's a good try, I'll give you that, but it's a good try, but we'll leave it at that.
It's a different event, but nuisance is nuisance.
But we'll leave it at that, John. Thank you. We're going to move on now to... Oh, yes, you want one more question? Just a slight question from Councillor Madden to the officer. Sorry.
Well, there are lots of things missing from these papers, I have to say, but the one thing I'd written down to ask earlier on anyway, I know the answer, but Section 116 of the Act provides that a senior police officer may take an order, if a nuisance is being caused by noise emanating from the premises. Have we heard from the police at all about these, the 2nd and 3rd of July?
The police have no jurisdiction over statutory noise nuisance. It's down to an Environmental Health Officer. However, we did receive a complaint via the police licensing officer from a local resident, and we also received a complaint from community warden, which they had received via 101.
I just think it's worth noting, Leo, that they haven't made representations today.
It's worth it, but no, sorry. Look, it says here, Section 161 of the Act provides that a senior police officer may make an order closing individual premises covered by a premise licence of Order 10 for up to 24 hours. And there are 3 bullet points where they reasonably believe that a nuisance is being caused by noise emanating from the premises. That's not saying that they don't have any control whatsoever over it, is it now?
I'll have to refer you to the solicitor, because it's a licensing legislation.
I mean, the responsible authorities, the police or environmental health, could object to a temporary event notice on any of the 4 licensing objectives if they so chose to do. The police, as far as I'm aware, have been made aware of the temporary event notice and have not made a formal representation. And I think you have to take the inference from that as being that the police do not have an objection on any of the 4 licensing objectives. But you also have to attach weight to the fact that the Environmental Health Responsible Authority are the lead authority for matters in relation to noise, and you have to accredit them with their specialist expertise in that area.
I'll allow one more, Councillor
Just to say, I accept that, but it's in the report, and the report says that the police can have a
Yes.
part to play.
The report was written by the licensing manager rather than environmental health. I'll just make that clear. But yes, in terms of where, and it doesn't necessarily relate to temporary event notices. The police can close premises under the exercise of that power where there is a noise nuisance.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to summing up because we finished where we need to do. So I'm going to hand over to the license.
Can I intervene? Because
Unless it's read it well.
unless you want to go into closed session, but I'm concerned that it's 10 days away if something's going to happen. What we haven't asked yourselves is how long it takes to set these things up. I don't know if you can do it in 10 minutes, PS systems and all the rest of it, hire them in and all that. So, John, you're not an expert, are you, on this? But I really would like to know, because there's an urgency, it seems to me, to this, to make a decision, because we haven't got the full information one way or the other.
I think you raise a valid point, and I think the applicant ought to be given an opportunity, whether now, Chair, or during summing up, to address the subcommittee on those issues that the Environmental Health team have raised, and whether or not they can implement them between now and the event taking place.
It's a fair question, and I think we'll wait for summing up for the applicant. I'm sure that they will address that in summing up. So we're going to move to summing up. So I'm going to hand over to Derek Stone, our licensing officer, if you'd like to add anything via summing.
I have nothing to add, thank you.
Thank you. Hand over to Lorraine and Steve as the responsible authority. Anything they wish to add on summing up?
Just like to sum up that the applicant has still got work to satisfy us that they will follow their noise management plan that they've submitted to us. They've asked for help from environmental health with regards to setting levels. We believe this is not really our responsibility. It's down for them to submit any levels and suggestions what they might think's acceptable. They're aware of the levels that was witnessed on the 2nd of July, so what not to achieve, and they've proven that they can have events on the end of the pier, but it just needs better management.
Thank you. Is there anything you want to add, Steve, at all?
The only other thing I would mention is that, unfortunately, the type of music that is being proposed is not akin to sort of low noise levels, and I think we believe that may have, unfortunately, an effect on proceedings.
Okay, thank you. I'll hand over to yourself, Mr. Walsgrove.
Yeah, just picking on the last point. It doesn't matter what genre of music you're playing through a system. If you're controlling the noise levels on that PA system, it doesn't matter whether you're playing pop music, classical music, whatever. The frequencies and the noise levels can be controlled. And what we're saying is you should have the confidence that with the change in the management and everything we've mentioned today, you can have that confidence. In terms of the only concern remaining from environmental health, it seems they want a bit more detail about Andy Thomas's experience, and for him to come along and say, well, the people who are going to be monitoring this system, i.e. himself and maybe another from his company, have got the requisite experience to be able to monitor it properly, which of course we can provide, and we can get all of that information by tomorrow. We could have had it. If we'd been asked for it, we could have provided it. We're saying, of course, he's qualified to be able to operate this event and contain it within reasonable levels so that residents aren't caused a nuisance, because he's already doing that for your own events at Portsmouth City Council. I found it quite staggering that there isn't an acknowledgement that he's obviously capable of what he's doing, because he's been doing it for so long, employed by your own council. But there we are. I can provide all of that information by tomorrow, no issues whatsoever. In terms of setting up the PA system, that will be done Sunday morning, so just prior to the event taking place. So there aren't any issues for you as a licensing subcommittee in being worried about, well, if we allow this temporary event notice to happen, is everything going to be in place? Everything is in place, except a bit of information that the local authority need around Andy Thomas and whatever member of staff he has supporting him as to what training they may be given by him. Obviously, for Mr. Bratty and Mr. Ware, who will be at the event, they have to now place reliance more on what Andy Thomas, he's been given that authority to control the levels of noise, and they will obviously be making sure from their own sort of personal perspective that Andy's doing his job, but they have to let him get on with deciding when and where those levels need to change because of things like the change of wind direction, all of those sorts of things which Mrs. Astle said, well, perhaps haven't been considered in the noise management report. You'll remember Richard Vivian saying, well, we can't put absolutely every single dynamic into that noise management report. This is an overall document, and there is more sort of meat on the bones underlying it all, and all of those things are taken into account by people who deal with PA systems and noise. So when they're monitoring, they don't just monitor it at the start and then at the finish. They will carry out that regular monitoring, because things do change during the day, weather being the biggest potential factor, which you could have a perfectly normal noise level, which is perhaps what happened when Mrs. Astle visited on Sunday the 3rd of July, when she said in her car she could hear the music, and then within a couple of minutes she couldn't hear it and assumed it had stopped. Well, it hadn't stopped. Maybe there had been, we don't know, because we haven't been able to establish those exact times, whether that was any change in the lowering of the sound system from a monitoring position, whether it was a change in the wind direction that might have meant that there was a temporary noise nuisance being caused at the time. We just don't know, and we didn't want to get into any of that, because as you heard from both myself and Richard Vivian, we wanted to approach this on the basis of you looking forward and looking at the next event and saying, well, they've obviously learned some lessons from what they did last time. They now have all those different things in place, different people, different sound system. We can have the confidence to let them do it. And if they don't do it, they're in big trouble, because they've got a noise abatement notice hanging over them, and also it will probably mean they'll never get another temporary event notice for the end of the pier again. So those two big threats should also give you confidence. The odd thing, and it's my last comment, the odd thing that Ms. Astle said about the noise abatement notice, it seemed to imply that that wasn't the big threat that I'd said it was, because we could appeal against it. Well, we can appeal against it, but the local authority, probably rightly added a tag to the end of that appeal that the effect of that noise abatement notice continues on pending any appeal. So even if we do appeal it, it has no impact whatsoever on that noise abatement notice. Environmental health officers have a choice whether to add that additional paragraph onto a noise abatement notice. So sometimes it's not put on, and then we appeal, noise abatement notice has no effect. These ones do. So even if we appealed, it's got no impact whatsoever. So it is that massive threat that I said it was. So I would hope, councillors, that you have heard enough to satisfy yourself that the confidence is there that this event can go ahead, they can prove themselves, and hopefully South Parade can enjoy a a good event on that Sunday and hopefully for the next 2 events in August and September. So I ask you not to issue the counter notice.
Thank you, Mr. Walsgrove. I'm just going to ask, are all parties happy with everything they've said and are satisfied? You happy? Derek, are you happy? Mr. Walsgrove, are you happy? Brilliant. We're going to go into closed session now to deliberate and make our decision. It is 5:05, so I assume... What do you think, Ben?
I think it's safe to say that at least 45 minutes for you to reach a decision, formulate your reasons for that
I'd
decision.
probably say 1:45 we'll be back. Okay, 1:45. So we're into closed session. Thank you.